welcome back to my channel. I am here with another astrology oracle reading for you. This is for the week of October 10th, and that means that we have a Libra sun, an Aries moon, and a Scorpio rising. So I've mentioned many times before that Libra and Aries are opposites, and because the sun and moon are in each of those respectively, that means that we just had a full moon. So yesterday at 5:55 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the full moon was exact in Aries. Now, whenever we are in a different or, we move into a new solar season in the zodiac, we will always see a new moon and a full moon that correspond to that cycle. So for Libra, we did have a Libra new moon earlier. Actually, I think that might have been in September, but don't quote me on that. And then, of course, yesterday we had our full moon in Aries. And because Aries is Libra's opposite. So as we move forward into Scorpio season, we will soon be approaching that eclipse axis because the new moon and full moon that will be taking place during Scorpio season will be attached to eclipses. So that is a very dynamic energy. And so even though our Aries full moon isn't marked by an eclipse or anything of that nature, it's really on the precipice of a very intense lunation cycle. And I think we're feeling it. I'll put it that way. A couple other important things that I noticed in the chart when I was looking earlier is we have almost an exact trine between the sun and Saturn. Saturn is at 18 degrees, stationed retrograde, and the sun is at 17 degrees. So they are just 1 degree off. And this is a kind of common theme throughout this chart. Same thing for Venus. Venus is at 14 degrees, so it's 4 degrees away from Saturn at 18. We're also seeing an out of sign opposition, which is kind of cool and not something that I've talked about too much, but currently Mercury is in Virgo and it is opposite to Jupiter, which is at 1 degree of Aries. But of course, had it been in Pisces, that would be the exact opposite of Virgo. So because it is so close, right? Mercury is at 29 degrees, and after 29 degrees, we reset at 0 degrees. So 29 and 1, they're actually a lot closer if you can work with that astrological math here. 29 and 1 are very close in terms of like ending one, degree cycle and entering into a new one. So this is what we call an out of sign opposition, because Aries is not the opposite to Virgo, but it is so close to still being in Pisces that it counts. We are also seeing a trine happening between Mars and Gemini at 22 degrees. And of course, Saturn is at 18 degrees. These are both air signs, so that's why we're seeing that trine there, about 4 degrees away. As I mentioned, that is kind of a common theme that's happening in this chart, is that there's almost exact things happening, but they're not quite there. And then we do actually have an exact opposition between Chiron at 14 degrees in Aries and Venus in Libra at 14 degrees. So anything that you can find in this chart that's exact, is just really coming down to the timing being just right when you look. But, when we see Venus and Chiron in an opposition, it can be very triggering. It can feel very wounding, especially coming off of a full moon in Aries. So if your emotions or your ability to relate to other people is feeling a little bit out of touch right now, then I would highly recommend using this time and this energy that you have for a little bit of self-care, and maybe even some boundary work. And, I don't know who needs to hear this, but no is a complete sentence. So that's a little bit of my preamble, my spiel for today. So you can see we are down to a really small deck of card options here, right? So as we have been going throughout the entire time since I've started, we are now at video 30. So we have pulled 30 cards and have received 30 interpretations at this point. And there are still some really good ones yet to be had. So we're not done yet, my friends. Even though the deck is smaller, there are still a lot of really important lessons to be had in here. Oh, I do want to also mention before I forget that this Friday is my astrology party at the Well. If you are local to Dayton, I would love to see you there. We're having a sun sign astrology contest with amazing prizes from a massage therapist and a reflexologist. I will also be offering discounts for future services, and I will be making a few cocktails from Eliza Kelly's awesome and so fun book, The Astrology or the Mixology of Astrology. So we will be, I love this book if you're looking for something fun that's like a good gift for someone. There are so many different drink recipes depending on the sign that you're working with. I will be probably focusing on my placements because we are also celebrating my 30th birthday that was last Thursday, and that will be Libra, Aquarius, and Scorpio. So if you can join us on Friday, I would absolutely love that. We're going to have a really, really, really great time, and I will be offering this party sort of in lieu of doing any in-person readings at the Well this month. So, all right, let's get to the cards. And I have just picked up Mercury Retrograde Reinvention. Now, we literally just completed a Mercury retrograde cycle, I believe, that ended on the 2nd or the 3rd. And at this point, we're pretty much clear of that energy. And I think that makes for a really good time to talk about, like, what just happened, right? Like, what really is a Mercury retrograde and what does it stand for? What does it signify? I think in, mainstream and modern astrology, this is perhaps one of the biggest transits and cycles that people are aware of. And it makes sense, right? Because Mercury is a personal planet. It has to do with communication, siblings, local community, idea sharing, kind of like local travel, right? It's like being in your car. It touches on a lot of things that I think affect our everyday life. And so it really does make sense to see a Mercury retrograde being such a impactful and really serious conversation that happens, out there in the collective. So let's start with what Mercury represents, okay? I think I've mentioned this before, and I believe I have a video on it. I'm about to just look. I sure do. So I will link my Mercury video in the show notes below, which will give you a much more in-depth analysis of what Mercury stands for. But basically, the ruling planets of Mercury are Virgo and Gemini. Again, this is all about idea sharing, communication, building up, routines, having a planner, all those kinds of things. And again, you can learn a lot more about it in the video that I'm going to link below. But when we have a retrograde, and I do want to mention, we have a lot of planets in retrograde right now. Okay, we have, let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 planets in retrograde. So it was 6 when we did have that Mercury retrograde, but it's kind of that we say the rule of Rees. Okay, so it's kind of an opportunity to sort of take a step back and provide some analysis for like what is actually happening, or what you're doing. So depending on where that Mercury retrograde fell into your chart, and it was happening between Libra and Virgo really heavily, and that's why we have Mercury in Virgo at 29 degrees. But wherever these fall into your chart, and in this particular chart it is the 10th house, these are going to be areas of life where you are going to need to experience a little bit of maybe editing, maybe even rewriting, very Virgo territory, and very much relatable to me as a Libra. But wherever, again, this Mercury transit, that retrograde is happening in your chart, this is a sign for you to slow down and to pay attention and to really look at the details and to kind of get into like the nooks and crannies of the situation where, when we're not in a retrograde and there's that forward motion happening, it's all happening like at the same time as every other transit in life, right? Nothing is within a vacuum in astrology. So we kind of get onto autopilot. I feel like it's a good word for like non-retrograde times. We're on autopilot, we're moving forward, we're, managing so many different things, we're multitasking, which is not even what our brain really like loves and thrives in doing. And we kind of just get caught up right? We start to make choices out of convenience. We start to make plans out of convenience. Some people pleasing can come in because sometimes it's just easier to make everybody happy than to speak your mind and say your truth. So yeah, when we have a retrograde, we're kind of shutting off that autopilot and sort of like moving a little bit backwards to say, what have I been doing here this whole time? Like, where is my energy going? Now, if you have been someone who has been, feeling especially mentally drained through this Mercury retrograde, that could be a really good indicator for you to start to pay attention to where your energy bleeds out very unintentionally, right? Because retrogrades have such an intentional energy behind them because we're revisiting things, we're recalibrating things. We're almost kind of going through and being like, what needs to get mended here, right? Mercury retrograde is an opportunity for maintenance, really, especially when it comes to the themes of Mercury and also of whatever house that transit was happening in for you. So for this past Mercury retrograde, there was definitely a lot of dynamic energy going on because we did have that, new moon in Libra. We just had this full moon in Aries, synced up to that Libra sun, and that is right in that same territory where Mercury has been doing its transit. We also have Venus in Libra, so that's been kind of passing by Mercury's retrograde as well, and these are all very personal planets. So it could be that relationships came back into your life. It could be that opportunities found their way back to you. And they seem like they're really fantastic and wonderful and lovely, because who doesn't love to have like a visit from an old friend or, to be reconsidered for something, right? But this is an opportunity to say, hold up, is this actually what I want? Is this actually what I need? One really fascinating Mercury retrograde thing that happened in my life was my parents, who live in New York, are making the decision to actually move back here to Ohio. And they had earlier in the year been reached out to by a neighbor who was interested in their house. They were, not interested at that time. And then the opportunity kind of came back to like revisit that and like have that conversation again and renegotiate even. And, that's kind of the cool thing about Mercury retrograde, is that some of the things feel so obvious, right? Like I said before, exes, job opportunities. Like if you've been putting out thousands and thousands of job applications this year, this could have been a time where your inbox was like getting a lot of responses. All those words are very Mercury retrograde. But it can also be things that are a lot more abstract. And that's why I think it's kind of cool to, keep a journal and to track transits, especially those that are affecting you personally. This is something I love doing because I love looking back and being like, okay, when this was happening, back in February, what were the transits happening? What was going on at that time? And then to like look at the situation now and see like, are there any correlations? Are there any, significations that a journey is in motion, right? Because that's one thing with a lot of astrological transits, is that they just mark a planet's journey, right? Conjunctions, new moons, those are new beginnings. Oppositions, full moons, it's kind of like the halfway point to getting back to that conjunction. And everything in between also signifies other parts of the journey. And Mercury is a journey related planet. Now, it's not Jupiter where it's like world travel, but it's definitely getting you from, A to B. And that's what Mercury is all about. And that can be, again, through a car, it can be through idea sharing, it can be through, your local community. There's so many ways that, again, once you're off autopilot and you get really intentional with the things that you're trying to do and say and share, that, very quickly they can be received by other people. That's just the nature of Mercury. So typically during Mercury retrogrades, we experience, disruptions to maybe our thought flow. Like if you're a creative who like really relies on their instinct and intuition to produce, work and to kind of self-inspire, Mercury retrograde can kind of be like a little bit of a difficult time for that, depending on your chart and how things are set up, right? If you're a natal Mercury retrograde person, you actually may really enjoy this time and that solidarity to kind of go back into yourself and be there and have that inspiration kind of come to life. Typically, we also, again, experience those technological disruptions Me personally, I don't feel like I had a ton of those this time around, and it could be because between, Virgo and Libra, these aren't planets that we actually associate with the internet or, social media. That would be more like Aquarius territory. And so when we have a Mercury retrograde in Aquarius, I notice it so very much. I really, really do. In this instance, it didn't feel as much of like an internet connection problem as much as it was maybe like, I'm not finding the right words to say, or, is this really what I want to do? Because Virgo is such a planning and like building like a system for, organization kind of planet, and Libra is so relational and focused on other people, those are more than likely the kind of, things that you were dealing with rather than like, again, like the internet and things of that nature. But again, depending on where this stuff is hitting in your chart, it could be a very different experience than what I'm describing. Astrology is all very unique to you and your natal chart. But essentially, Mercury retrograde, it is not a messy bitch. It's not here to ruin your life. It's actually here to, again, help you slow down and get off autopilot and start looking at things with a far more intentional eye to say, like, is this really what I want to do? Is this really where I want to be putting my energy? Is this person really worth all the effort I have to put in to maintain this relationship? Or, somebody could be having those same thoughts about you, right? I mean, we're all in this together. So Mercury retrograde, and the mantra that we have here is reinvention. Another re word. Going to open up my little book here, and I feel like every time I say this, I want to say my handy dandy book. All right, Mercury retrograde, reinvention, and the quote here is from James Russell Lowell. Mishaps are like knives that either serve us or cut us as we grasp them by the blade or by the handle. Oof. That is visual words right there, and I am here for this. I'm a natal Libra Mercury, so I love visual, literary works and things of that nature. So when I hear and see this quote, it's a great way of showing you, like, hey, if you're on autopilot and you're not paying attention and someone hands you a knife, do you want to grab the blade or do you want to grab the handle? A lot of that's going to come from like your situational awareness, and also just like your, being present in the moment. Mercury retrograde is regarded as a time when things tend to go wrong. In actuality, it marks a 3.5-week period where any important decisions should be postponed. Another thing I could have mentioned for sure is during Mercury retrograde, it is not recommended that you sign contracts or that you forge like super bonded relationships, just because they're not exactly being started in a forward motion. They're like in an editing phase, and it's like we don't publish when we're in editing phases, right? About 3 or 4 times a year, Mercury goes through a motion called retrograde, which means to go back or to retreat, another great re-word. But this inner planet is so close to the sun that it just appears that it's going backwards. It's really not. This is an illusion because the Earth orbits the sun at a different speed than Mercury and the other planets. From an astrological point of view, the planets in retrograde motion cause potent effects on the Earth below. No planet goes retrograde as often as Mercury because it's never more than 28 degrees from the sun. And because of this, it's given us a dubious phrase that when something goes awry, many exclaim, Mercury must be retrograde. I mean, seriously, how many people say that? I can even find like GIFs when I'm making my, newsletter emails about that very phrase. Mercury isn't a predictable planet going along its normal direct path anyway. Once it's retrograde, which is almost like having your car in reverse, all things ruled by Mercury suddenly begin to wobble and go off kilter. However, if you're a writer, when Mercury is retrograde, this is a great perfect time to revise your writings, again, being in editing mode. Mercury is the counterpart of Hermes, the Greek Olympian god, the sly trickster who is not only big on pranks, but also false moves. He is the god of transitions, roads, and boundaries. The very name Hermes has to do with speech and implies that he is a translator. Mercury, as Hermes, conveys information. When that information comes to us wrongly because of Mercury's unpredictable retrograde motion, nothing seems to go right. When this card comes up in a reading, it is a signifier that's a good time to back up equipment, computers, cell phone numbers, double check your address book, and anything to do with mechanics and technology. Electronical appliances that you may purchase at this time could be returned. Any sales will often turn into massive duds. Don't make the mistake of purchasing a vehicle at this time either. So there's, about 12 to potentially 16 weeks out of the month where buying a car and signing contracts and publishing and declaring and doing things in a very frank and undoable way are not recommended. You'll want to carefully go over any contract you sign, double check emails and letters that you send. If you're about to leave on a trip, leave early, delays could be expected. Mundane matters aside, retrograde planets are said to be more empathic, and that means that strangely we are more silently and internally keyed into their energies. This causes unusual and fated meetings and occurrences to happen. You may meet up with someone that you haven't seen in years at a most unexpected place. And that has been happening to me actually, which is very again, kind of in that Libra friendship, other people. I was at work the other night and someone recognized me from working and helping them at an Ulta 6 years ago. What? How did you remember me? You may meet with someone again in an unexpected place. You could have a conversation with someone that you only have a superficial relationship with, and this could actually cause you to have a much deeper connection, this conversation. If you're asking about strengthening a relationship during a Mercury retrograde, it is not recommended to get married. However, it's a great time to renew your vows. So if you are already in a relationship, especially one that's very long-term and stable, Mercury retrogrades can be kind of a good idea to get a little nostalgic and talk about your first date and kind of just be in that moment together, right? That's your relationship between you and that person, and nobody else gets to really have that. And reminiscing, another good word, beautiful thing to do. If you're feeling hopeless or worried that relationships will never work for you, Mercury retrograde can actually be a good thing. It means that you will know more about your situation and yourself, and the possibility of fixing things to get things moving is very likely. It's also a fortuitous time to connect with a past lover, to revise, reinvent, and renew your relationship. So I do know some people who have reconnected with past loves during this Mercury retrograde, and I just think it's kind of cool to see how this very understood, very talked about transit can look so different for so many people. And that is Mercury retrograde for you. So thank you so much for tuning in. That is all I have for you this week. I'll be back next week to share some fun little, hopefully, stories from the party I'm hosting Friday. But in the meantime, you can stay tuned for my newsletter that's going to be sending out tomorrow. And if you don't, then follow me on Instagram because I post little fun things and little astrology and even personal things on there too. So I will link that in the show notes below. And until next week, bye.